You're listening to the DCAU Review, hosted by Cal and Liam. Streaming on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and at DCAUreview.com. Now, here's today's episode.
Welcome to episode 105 of the DCAU Review. I am one of your hosts, Cal. With me, my good brother, good friend, and co-host. That's right, it's Liam. Liam, still hanging out here in future Gotham. We continue our month here with Batman Beyond, and we have an episode today with some connections, some retroactive Easter eggs that happen to it, which is cool, as we get to discuss today. Welcome to the DCAU Review.
Yes, and as you mentioned, we're still smack dab in the middle of our month of Batman Beyond reviews, and we have the episode Mind Games to talk about this week.
That is right. So we'll get our thoughts and general breakdown of our four categories in just a moment here. But Liam, as we talked about last week, we thought there had been this shift in kind of the tone and where things were going in Batman Beyond. For me, this episode sort of takes a step back towards that maybe season one tone. There's not as much stuff happening at Hamilton Hill High, not as much teen drama happening here. And for me, it was a little bit of a welcomed return.
Yeah, this one feels like a little bit more of a happy medium, I think, between that season one and these more teen or younger viewer friendly episodes that we've seen in season two. Because you still do have Terry at school, you still have him, bouncing dialogue and exposition off of Max, but then you also get to see Bruce Wayne get a lot more involved than he has been in some of the other episodes we reviewed in season two so far. I mean, you get to see him be a bit of a detective, and him and Terry kind of working this mystery together. So yeah, this episode I think felt a bit more like a happy medium between the two styles that we've experienced with this show so far.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. That's for sure. It was nice to see the return of a little bit more Bruce being involved. But as you said, there's some dialogue with Terry preparing for history lessons and all of that. We'll get into that in just a moment. But before we do, Liam, I'm sure you have our IMDb synopsis ready to go for Mind Games, which originally aired December 4th, 1999, putting us just a little over 20 years old.
Yes, and this is the IMDb synopsis for Mind Games, which is written by Alan Burnett and directed by Butch Lukic with music by Christopher Carter. And that synopsis reads as such. A young girl with telepathic powers calls to Batman for help. And that's it.
Well, that's one of those that certainly leaves a little more to be desired when it comes to descriptions. So as we jump into plot, let us talk about this. So opening scene, there's as Terry is preparing for this test, there's a car that gets into a little bit of a fender bender, which I didn't know was possible in like Sky cars, but has some engine trouble or something, and Terry saves it from crashing.
Lightning strikes it, right?
Oh, you're right.
There's like a bad storm at the start of the episode.
What are the chances? That's what they don't talk about with the disadvantages of flying cars. Everybody wants flying cars, but nobody wants to talk about what happens when lightning strikes them.
You don't have those rubber tires to absorb the electricity.
There you go. Science. All right. So as he saves these people from crashing, they get out of the car to thank him, and he's met by Wednesday Addams or Tuesday Addams, Thursday Addams, one of the Addams kids, or at least visually striking me. Matilda Addams, yes. So he's met
by the way, once we get to voice acting.
And then later on, this same girl starts appearing to him sort of through telekinesis. And we learn that this little girl is being held against her will. And later on, I guess in the story, we find out that there's been a sort of a pseudo X-Men sort of homage, as these people are going around recruiting these young children with powers. And except these people are clearly using it for evil, something part of the quote-unquote brain trust. And then it's up to Batman to try and rescue this little girl from these evil people that are stealing her, and action ensues. So let's jump into the plot here. What did you like? What did you not like about this episode?
Yeah, so I think they introduced some interesting concepts in this brain trust thing. Again, I like that there's a bit of mystery to it. It's not immediately spelled out exactly what's going on or what's really at play here. And they sort of, as the episode goes on, as we mentioned, Terry and Bruce sort of stumble upon this mystery of this sort of weird secret society of as you said, called the Brain Trust. And I guess it's unclear if they all have psychic powers or if it's just like this division of them do. But they all have these strange abilities. So yes, there's certainly an X-Men esque quality to it. But of course, unlike the X-Men, and there's some of that too, as the mystery deepens and Terry's able to figure out who this girl is after Bruce shows him a bunch of different missing children photos. And he goes and speaks to her parents. Basically, this Brain Trust posed as a school, a sort of Xavier school for gifted youngsters, and convinced the parents to sign her up and give her to this school. And then days later, they sort of realized they've been had and that the school was a fake. But of course, by then it's too late. So they introduced like a very interwoven, intricate mystery. But to their credit, it wasn't so complicated that I felt, say, ripped off by them resolving it within 22 minutes, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I didn't feel like this needed to be longer than it was. I felt like it certainly built up tension to the very end, with Terry basically having to rush to save her from being shipped off on this she's at the docks and they're about to leave in a boat, and Terry has to rush to save her. The only thing that I felt like it did a great job of building up to the final climax. I think that the mid-scene battle between the Stephen, who ended up being Stephen Mandragora's son,
Yes,
and also known as the albino in this episode, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But the battle between the albino and Terry was really interesting. I think we'll talk about that in visuals also. There's some great visual gags, but I think that it's right before that scene, Bruce has a conversation with Terry about mind over matter, and they don't even use that during the fight. And Bruce isn't really talking or radioing or encouraging Terry or reminding Terry of that conversation they had. But there's a point in that battle that happens where you can see there's like this shift where Terry realizes that he can't see, he's not going to overpower. He's gonna have to rely on sort of his general instincts in order to defeat this guy, and he does, which I thought was really subtle. They didn't beat you over the head with it, and I thought was a cool way of resolving that fight. I felt a little bit gypped out at the end. I felt like that the final battle between Terry and Bombshell, who's the female, and Impervious Man, I believe is his name. The battle between them was sort of underwhelming.
Yeah, it's interesting because, as we mentioned, it seems like all of these villains that we're dealing with, as well as Tamara, the little girl that's reaching out to Terry, they all have like different flavors of the psychic power. So obviously, like Tamara can reach out and speak to people with her mind, and we find out near the end of the episode she can also kind of create these grand illusions, and the albino seems to have similar abilities as well as telekinesis. The indestructible man, the impervious man, seems to just have trained his mind to feel no pain, is how Bruce Wayne explains it. And then there's Bombshell, who shoots lasers out of her hands. And that's kind of the one that's like, okay, and if they're telekinetic blasts, I guess that's fine. But it's not clear to me then, but like Terry disables her by putting like a life preserver around her arms so that she can't like raise her arms.
Yeah.
Again, it would seem like if the power comes from her mind, she shouldn't like have to shoot it out of her hands. But maybe this is
Right.
me just trying to add too much logic to a children's cartoon. But that was the only thing I thought. Yeah, I thought the way her powers are visualized, right? That, and then Tamara uses her powers to blind the impervious man, and he just kind of falls over. Yeah, I would agree that it's not the most climactic battle scene we've seen, and again, we'll certainly get into more of the specifics of it and visuals, but yeah, and I do like I said, that it does have kind of a sweet little ending too, as Max and Terry are kind of talking about what happened, and then you see the projection of the girl who's been so scared and ominous the whole episode now is happy and waving to Terry. And yeah, I thought that was a nice ending to it. Like I said, I don't think it's necessarily perfect, but I do think they did a pretty good job of introducing a interesting, fun mystery and wrapping it up without feeling like anything was too rushed.
I kind of wish that the scene with the albino had ultimately been the climax. I think that the battle because of how great that fight in that battle was, and recognizing Terry having to make this sort of mental adjustment to use his instincts in order to defeat the albino, I thought that was really, really strong. And then the disappointment of Terry sort of needing help from the little girl, which is fine, but ultimately, and even Max points out at the end, she jokes with him that she was the one who really saved Terry's butt with that. Right. With that. So I could see that being sort of the help, if that had been sort of the mid episode battle, but with that being the climax, I don't know. I felt a little robbed because of that. I think overall I liked the episode, but because that climax was a little weak for me, I ended up giving it a 6 out of 10.
Yeah, I'm in that same ballpark. I went 7 out of 10. Don't really disagree with a lot of what you're saying, but yeah, like I said, I think for what it was, I thought it was enjoyable enough and a good time. And obviously, as you mentioned, this is not the last time we see some of these characters, both the albino and
Bombshell.
And Bombshell go on to appear in a Zeta Project episode. And then, of course, we get to see as you mentioned, a young Edgar Mandragora show up in the excellent JLU episode, which we have not yet gotten to review, entitled Double Date. So
my favorite Justice League Unlimited episode.
Wow. That's certainly one we're looking forward to covering down the line. But yeah, as you mentioned, kind of some cool little retroactive Easter eggs, and it's nice that these characters sort of reappeared in this brain trust, because it's always kind of awkward when you introduce a big threat like this big secret society of psychics, and then they show up once and then you never hear from them again. So it's nice that they kind of lived on in some of the other shows.
For sure. Are you aware of them using them in any of the comics or any of the spin-offs at all?
Not that I'm aware of. Okay. Possibly. I'm not as familiar with sort of the like 2010 to 2012 Batman Beyond comics run, which sort of melded the DCAU continuity with the regular DC Comics continuity, kind of the same way that the current series does, but I'm not familiar with them sort of being brought back in that sort of a big serious way, other than maybe a passing reference or something.
Gotcha. All right. So those are our scores for the plot. Let's move on to visuals and animation, Liam. There are a lot of interesting visuals. We alluded to the scene with the albino. There are a couple of Easter eggs in here that I enjoyed also. What'd you like about visuals?
Yeah, I think we've already sort of touched on a couple of them in plot. I think the standout sequence certainly is the fight between Batman and Edgar, or the / albino. Just a really, really fantastic visual scene, and it's funny because, and it totally works to me because it's, all most of it's all in Terry's head, but when he's sort of being first attacked, and it keeps flashing between him as Batman and him as Terry, and his face kind of gets a little longer. It almost looks like something out of like Freakazoid. And I mean
Yes.
that as a compliment, for the record. Because again, this whole idea is that this is not reality. Even within this not real show, this is a step removed from that even. So they got to be very cartoony, I thought, in that sequence in the best way. Again, I mean that as a compliment. I thought, again, Butch Lukic directed this episode. I thought that scene, and I also thought the first fight that Batman has with the Indestructible Man is actually really good. And there's some really good before somebody throws a punch, you'll see him kind of wind up a little bit, just a little bit of those extra flourishes that we talk about from time to time that add a little bit more to these fight scenes. And there's actually a great shot as Batman's on the ground looking up at this penthouse, and he his rocket boots fire, and he flies up, and as he flies into the camera, the bat symbol sort of acts as our scene wipe. And as the bat symbol goes across the screen, we sort of wipe to the next scene. I thought that was a really, really awesome and clever way to do those sort of scene transitions. So yeah, there's some really, really cool stuff, especially I think in those two fight scenes.
Absolutely. A couple of the visual Easter eggs that I picked up on. You mentioned there's a scene where Bruce is at the Bat computer with Terry, and he's sort of flashing all these pictures of children, missing children across the screen. It was very, very difficult not to pick up the picture of a young Annie,
Yes.
who we recall we've mentioned a couple times. We have not done the episode, but of course she appears in Growing Pains. She also appeared in the Batman: The Adventures Continue comic that came out this week. She's on the cover of that comic as well. So yes. Nice little ode and Easter egg. And Terry mentions that all these children are missing, so it would make sense if it's an old database that Bruce would have Annie in there, I guess.
Yeah. And also,
go ahead.
Sorry, this might have been where you were going, but there's also, her hair is a different color, but we also see what appears to be Carrie Kelly, or the girl who looked very much like Carrie Kelly from the Legends of the Dark Knight episode as well.
There you go. I actually did not pick that one up, so that was a good pickup there. The other thing that I doing research on this episode, somebody mentioned that this is the second episode that Terry wears Dick Grayson's tuxedo. That he had worn Dick's tuxedo, I believe, in the first Spellbinder episode. So very interesting nod there. Also, I would say visually, Impervious Man or Indestructible Man or whatever his name was, he looks very visually like a classic Jack Kirby drawing of Thor, the God of Thunder.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that, because I didn't think that necessarily, but I did think maybe because of the haircut that he looked a lot like Orion in Superman the Animated Series when he removes his helmet in Apocalypse Now. He has a blonde Orion, which of course was pretty much directly ripped from the pages of those original Kirby New Gods books.
Right.
And we know, obviously, if you know anything about the creators involved, especially Bruce Timm, what a big how this sort of the shadow of Jack Kirby laid over all of these DCAU cartoons. Yeah, I think that's probably not an accident, if I had to guess.
For sure. And we already mentioned the visual gag, of course, with the albino, not the visual gag, but the albino, of course, reappearing later on as Stephen Mandragora's son Edgar. But yeah, so you have some interesting visuals that happen there, and some visual Easter eggs. I agree with you. And by the way, if you're interested in checking out just that clip of the fight scene that we're talking about between Batman Beyond and the albino, check out our Instagram page at DCAUreview.com. Liam had posted that clip earlier this week. It's a really, really, really interesting fight scene. Well worth going out of your way to check it out. Again, I think going back to the battle, I was sort of disappointed in, but there is an interesting visual gag where the giant Teletubby-esque toy appears, and she makes her toy sort of this gigantic gigantic monster essentially, which I thought was an interesting gag.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit. In the final season of the Teen Titans cartoon, there's a character introduced that's a little girl who they think just has like psychic powers, but then it turns out she literally has an imaginary friend that's a giant teddy bear. And that's sort of what this reminded me of.
Yeah. Yeah. So with all those things, with a really, really solid middle battle between Batman and the albino, I gave the visuals a very strong 8 out of 10.
And I gave it that exact same score.
There we go. Brothers, we think alike. All right. Let's move on, Liam. Let's talk about music here. Again, I don't have as many musical notes for this episode, except that we hear the Batman Beyond theme used as sort of a transition between a couple of the scenes. I pulled that out. There's some more traditional orchestral music that's used, especially in the scene between Bombshell and the little girl. There's some tension building music, and I thought that the music in the Batman versus the albino scene was really strong as well.
Yeah, that, and I think the music again in the scene with the fight with the Impervious Man, there's some good sort of, not super memorable, but it is good fast tempo fight music that this show tends to be very good at. Like I said, I appreciate some of the softer music as well. Some of the scenes where Terry's talking to Tamara, as we mentioned earlier in the episode, the scene is Terry sort of getting the story from Tamara's parents about how they were sort of swindled by this school or this not school. I thought they added in some interesting music. A really interesting little scene as Terry sort of almost reached a dead end as he's sort of walking around in his house, and he goes by and he sees his little brother Matty sleeping, and he goes and like adjusts the covers for him. And I thought that was like a nice moment of him sort of having this realization that he's so desperate to save this girl, and it sort of reminds him of his own family that's that he would do anything to protect, and he knows he has to go forward and find this girl. And I thought the music was understated, but I thought it did a nice job there. Yeah, I thought the music overall not great, not all time great, but I would give it a solid 6 out of 10.
All right, I gave it just a tick higher. I went 7 out of 10. I think I really appreciated bringing in the standard Batman Beyond theme as a transition piece. I really liked that. And I think the battle scene, even the final battle, had some good music in it. Even if I thought it was underwhelming, the scene itself, I thought the music upped the ante, so to speak. So yeah, pretty strong. So I gave it a 7 out of 10. All right, Liam, let's move on to our final category of the day. That is going to be voice acting. Let's talk about our voice cast today. Who do we need to know about?
Yeah, we have an interesting voice cast, including a few DCAU veterans, or in some cases, people that would go on to play other DCAU voices, and this was their first one. We mentioned the Invulnerable Man, the Impervious Man, whatever you'd like to call him. We know he doesn't have a name. So he is played by one Victor Rivers, who we actually just talked about recently in our 100th episode, where we covered Starcross. He played Commander Hrotalik, not Hawkman.
There you go.
It's a little distracting because he has such a unique voice. So it's hard not to hear him as that Hrotalik character, but
for sure,
he does a fine job for what's asked of him. It's just one of those things where we've mentioned that quite a few times before, where when a Mark Hamill or a Michael Rosenbaum or somebody pops up in a role that is not the role that you know them best for, it can be a little jarring sometimes.
Oh, for sure.
We have Brian Tochi as the albino, who was Shiv on Static Shock, as well as I just noticed this time, I don't think we noticed this back when we reviewed the Static Shock episode with him, but he was also the man who played Leonardo in the live-action 90s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movies. So even though I don't know how many actual lines the albino has in this episode, but thought that was worth mentioning just because of the DCAU tie-in and then because of that. Kate Jackson as a Bombshell, who folks might know from the original Charlie's Angels show if you're a bit older. She's also on a few other television shows over the years. I don't think she's great in this episode, but again, she's just sort of there to be the more mustache twirling evil stepmother type villain, and she's fine. And then yes, we have Mara Wilson playing Tamara, the young girl with the psychic connection to Terry, who folks might know if you watch certain movies in the 90s, including the 90s remake of Miracle on 34th Street, or in fact a movie entitled Matilda, which involved a girl developing psychic powers. I'm guessing that casting was not necessarily an accident. And
they like to do that.
Yeah, it's funny. I think we talked about that back in the Return of the Joker movie. The guy who played Tim Drake was in some weird little movie when he was a kid called The Boy with the Green Hair, and then he went on to play the Tim Drake Joker character. So yeah, I'm guessing Mara Wilson being cast in this role was not an accident, and I think she does a good job. Yeah, again, we've talked about this a lot. When you're casting an actual child or young adult as a kid, it's certainly different than when you have somebody that's an adult doing the kid's voice. But I think it plays well in this episode because there is a certain fear and innocence to her performance that maybe wouldn't be there with a more polished traditional voice actor.
Agree.
Yeah, so and then just rounding out, we have our regular cast. We have Will Friedle as Terry McGinnis / Batman. We have Kevin Conroy as Bruce Wayne, and we of course have Cree Summer as Max. Like I said, I think everybody's for the most part is fine. I don't think anybody's great, but I do think the back and forth between Terry and the young girl Tamara is good, and I think Will Friedle has a strong showing here. So for all those reasons, I gave voice acting a 7 out of 10.
If you didn't know any better, you'd think we were related or had the same similar thought process here. I also gave it a 7 out of 10. I would agree with you. I think that certainly the part that stands out is Tamara and Terry's interactions, especially that initial one where he's trying to take the test and she sort of floats in and
You have to help me. I don't want to go. I refuse to go. Please help me.
What?
Please, I don't want to go. Please help me.
I don't understand.
Mr. McGinnis, what don't you understand?
Nothing. Sorry.
Please, you have to help me. I don't want to go. I refuse to go. Please help me. Please. Please, you have to help me. I don't want to go. I refuse to go. Please help me. Please.
Is kind of heckling him while he's trying to take this test.
Help me.
But yeah, I think that everybody else does a fine job. We would be remiss not to talk about, by the way, the fact that Terry is still an awful boyfriend. I mean, kudos to him for not dragging Dana to this stakeout and then ditching her. But at the same time, showing up at a very expensive restaurant when you can't even take and meet your own girlfriend at a chili place, as we saw at last week's episode, but you can take your supposedly platonic friend to this super expensive restaurant where you have to dress up wearing a tuxedo so that you can do a stakeout. Man, what a bad boyfriend.
Yeah, it's there's even in episodes where Dana doesn't appear, we have an opportunity make sure we get on our soapbox for at least a moment here and just remind you all that hashtag Dana deserves better.
So much better. All right, so I guess we should total our scores up here, Liam, and totaling up all of my scores, I come up with a 28 out of 40. What about you?
And I, adding up my score, it's funny, even when we don't have the same scores for every category, we somehow end up with such similar scores. But yes, I in fact have the exact same score, a 28 out of 40 this week.
Oh boy.
From there, I think we can talk about rewatchability. This doesn't feel like a must-watch to me in any way, unless you're doing if you're doing a deep dive, I guess it's worth it because these characters do, come back in other series or are referenced in other series. So I guess from that perspective, if you're doing a real big, all-encompassing DCAU deep dive or rewatch. But I wouldn't say as far as just your average episode of Batman Beyond, or if you're looking for the best of Batman Beyond, I wouldn't say this is a must-watch.
Yeah, I would concur with you. I don't think it's a must-watch. I definitely don't think that it has a cute retroactive Easter egg with the double date episode, and obviously, as we talked about, these characters do show up again on the Zeta Project. Let's be honest here. Zeta is probably fifth tier of importance when it comes to DCAU shows. So if you're not going for the deep dive, as you said, yeah, then this is not a must watch. There are some cool things about it. There are some cool sequences, but you can watch those on YouTube if need be, or pull up the very popular DC Universe streaming app and just watch the scenes there. Again, not a paid advertisement, folks. But it could be.
But it could be. But it always could be.
Always could be. Yeah, so I would agree with you. It's not a must watch. It's if you want to watch it, fine. I'm not recommending it as a skip because I don't think that it's a must skip either. It's just kind of you can.
Yeah, I definitely would not say this is an automatic skip, but it's probably not one that I will revisit in my spare time very often either.
Agreed. All right, Liam. Well, that will wrap us up for this week's episode. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Again, don't forget to check us out at DCAUreview.com. You can check out our entire library of episodes, including all of our bonus episodes. You can break things down by favorite villain, series, and of course, you can also check out our best and worst picks, which actually this episode does not fall into either of those, top picks or worst episodes. But you can check out those as we listen there. Don't forget, you can also follow us at DCAU Review on Twitter, at DCAU Review on Instagram. Do a lot of great stuff on both of those pages, so make sure you check those out. Liam, people are going to want to subscribe to us on their favorite podcast app because we have another new episode coming out a week from today. What are we going to be tackling on next week's episode?
Yes, we'll be continuing on with our month of Batman Beyond reviews with the very next episode in sequential order, that being Season 2, Episode 11, which is entitled Revenant.
All right, and there we go. Looking forward to that one. I didn't mention at the beginning of this episode, but these are not episodes that I remember seeing a whole lot. So it's been nice to review and revisit some of these that have been. It's been probably at least 15 to maybe 10 to 15 years since I saw them last. So it's been a great month thus far. So I look forward to checking that one out.
Yeah, definitely. As has been mentioned in the past, I think probably early on when we were reviewing Batman Beyond, there was a time where as a child I was banned from watching this show. So almost none of these sort of, especially these early Season 2 episodes, unless they were on reruns later on when the show was on Cartoon Network, or maybe I caught them once when the DVDs first came out. But yeah, a lot of these were not in heavy rotation for me, even sort of as I got older. So yeah, these Batman Beyond episodes, I think we get to come in them with probably as fresh eyes almost as anything that we review as far as these four main shows.
Totally agree. Looking forward to that next week. All right, so that will wrap us up for this week's episode. I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
and we will talk to you on the next episode of the DCAU Review.
Bye-bye.